The lantern is already lit when Mina crawls through the little door for the first time. Underground, warm, smelling of pine shavings and turned earth. Her grandfather built this, dug it from the hillside with his own hands, the same hands that once pulled silver from mountains. She doesn't know yet that it will save her. 3 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday morning in late May of 1888, a wagon rolled down the track from Copper Creek toward an old cabin sitting quiet against a Colorado hillside. Josiah Baird stood on the porch, watching it come. He had spent 40 years making things fit inside the earth, tunnels, chambers, passages shaped to purpose. He was about to learn that the hardest thing to fit inside any space is a family that has been broken. The cabin had been enough for two. That was the honest truth of it, and Josiah had known it since January, when the letter arrived from Denver telling him his son Raymond was gone, influenza, fast and merciless, and that Raymond's wife had followed him 6 days later. 2 children remained. The county had held them in a charitable house through the winter, waiting on arrangements. Josiah and Evelyn had written back immediately. Send them to us. The cabin measured 14 feet by 16 feet. 1 room, a stone hearth at the north wall, a cook stove beside it, a table with 2 chairs, a rope bed in the corner where Josiah and Evelyn had slept for 19 years, a shelf of books, a shelf of jars, 2 hooks by the door for coats, and a small braided rug the color of autumn wheat. It was a good life compressed into a small space, the way Evelyn sometimes pressed dried wildflowers between the pages of her Bible. Everything precious, everything fitted close. There was a loft above, barely 4 feet of clearance under the roof peak, reached by a ladder nailed to the wall. Josiah had used it for storing rope and winter tools. He had already cleared the loft out, swept it, laid down a plank floor over the raw boards, carried up a straw tick and 2 folded blankets. He stood at the base of the ladder and looked up at what he had made and understood with the quiet certainty of a man who had spent a lifetime reading underground spaces that it was not enough headroom, not enough light, no way for a small child to get down safely in the night. Evelyn had said nothing, but she had looked at the loft with the same expression she used when a recipe came out poorly, patient, already thinking of something better. The mountain air smelled of pine resin and snowmelt, still threading cold through the creek below. Spring was late this year and generous, and the hillside behind the cabin was alive with new grass. Josiah looked at that hillside the morning the wagon came. He was already thinking. The wagon stopped, and 2 children climbed down. Mina first, 8 years old, thin in a gray dress, carrying a flour sack tied at the neck that held everything she owned. She looked at the cabin, then at the hillside, then at Josiah, with eyes that had learned to measure things quickly. Oliver came after her, 5 years old and round-cheeked despite everything, clutching a wooden horse with 1 ear missing. He walked straight to Josiah and looked up at him the way young children look at very tall trees, not frightened, just calculating the distance. "That your horse?" Josiah asked. "His name is Captain," Oliver said. "Good name." Evelyn was already coming off the porch with her arms open. Mina let herself be hugged, briefly, carefully, like someone practicing a thing they had not done in a while. The first night showed Josiah exactly what he was dealing with. Evelyn had made a supper of salt pork and cornbread and a pot of beans seasoned with a little dried sage, and the 4 of them sat at the table that had only ever needed 2 chairs. Josiah had brought in the stool from the porch and turned a crate on its end for Oliver, and they ate with their elbows touching and the warmth of the stove pressing in from one side and the warmth of the hearth from the other. It was not unpleasant, but it was very close. Oliver knocked over his tin cup twice. Mina ate with her flour sack on her lap because there was nowhere to put it down. Josiah noticed, but said nothing. A child who kept her things within reach was a child who had learned, recently, that things could disappear. After supper, Evelyn bathed Oliver in the washtub behind the curtain she had rigged across the room's corner, and Josiah took Mina out onto the porch to watch the last of the light leave the mountains. They stood without talking for a while, which suited them both. "Where do we sleep?" Mina asked finally. "Loft," Josiah said. "You and Oliver both. Evelyn and I are down below." She nodded. He helped her up the ladder and watched her look around at the low-ceilinged space, the 2 blankets, the straw tick, the single candle stub in a tin holder, and he saw her face do something careful and controlled, the way a person's face moves when they are deciding not to say the true thing. "It's fine," she said. It's not, Josiah said honestly. Not yet. She looked at him, surprised. He climbed back down and stood in the room and looked at the four walls and the loft above and the two of them getting ready for bed on opposite sides of a curtain and Mina's thin shadow moving overhead and Oliver's voice asking something in a small, sleepy tone. He had built tunnels into mountains that were more generous than this. The hillside was right there. He had 40 years of knowing what the earth would hold. The question was not whether he could do it. The question was whether it was wise to dig beneath the hill where his grandchildren would sleep, and how deep and how safe and how to make it feel like shelter instead of burial. He sat by the banked fire for a long time. By the time the cabin was fully dark and quiet and he could hear 4 people breathing in a space meant for 2, he had answered himself. He rose before light and went out to the hillside. The slope behind the cabin rose at a gentle angle, good consolidated clay over a shelf of sandstone, the kind of ground he had read 100 times underground. He crouched and pressed his hand flat against the earth and felt the cool density of it, the solidity. He walked the slope in the early gray light, tapping with the heel of his boot, noting where the ground rang firm and where it softened. Then he went to the barn, found his old drift pick where it hung on the wall like a retired soldier, and carried it back to the hillside. He marked a spot with a stick. He began. Evelyn watched him from the kitchen window while she mixed the morning porridge. She had known this man for 38 years. She had seen him read rock the way other men read weather, with patience and a kind of physical intelligence that lived in his palms and shoulders rather than his head. She did not ask him what he was doing. She could see what he was doing. She began quietly to make a list: canvas for curtains, 2 small wooden crates for shelving, a second lamp, the spare quilt from the cedar chest, ribbon enough for 2 children's things. By the end of the first day, Josiah had a hole in the hillside 4 feet wide and 3 feet deep. It was not impressive to look at. A raw mouth of earth, a pile of dark clay thrown to the side, the smell of turned ground rising into the spring air, the clean, mineral smell that Josiah associated with the best years of his life, with purpose and progress and the peculiar satisfaction of making space where there had been none. He had chosen the entry point 11 feet behind the cabin's back wall on the slope's gentlest grade, angled slightly downward for drainage. The clay here was what miners called true ground, dense, consistent, with no hidden wet seams running through it. He had pushed an iron rod 3 feet in at 6 separate points before choosing the spot, feeling for the resistance that told him what was solid and what was not. Oliver found him at mid-morning. The boy came around the back corner of the cabin, still carrying Captain the One-Eared Horse, and stopped 6 feet from the excavation with his mouth open. "What's that?" he asked. "A start," Josiah said. Oliver approached the edge of the pile with the absolute confidence of a 5-year-old who had not yet learned to be careful around things, and Josiah put a hand out to keep him back from the edge. "Is it a cave?" Oliver asked. "Going to be a room? Underground?" "Yes." Oliver stared into the dark opening for a long moment. "For who?" "For you and your sister." The boy's face moved through several expressions: surprise, then a kind of cautious delight, then something more serious, as if he understood that this was a significant fact and deserved consideration. "Can Captain come?" "Captain can come," Josiah said. Oliver sat down in the grass at a respectful distance and watched Josiah work for the rest of the morning, occasionally providing commentary that Josiah found surprisingly useful. "That dirt's a different color, Grandpa. Is that bad?" "No, son. That's the clay layer. That's good." "Oh." And in this way, the two of them developed a quiet working relationship that suited them both. Mina was more difficult. She watched from the porch with her arms folded, and when Evelyn gently suggested she might go see what her grandfather was making, she said, "I know what he's making." She said it without inflection, neither approving nor disapproving, simply reporting. "Do you think it's a good idea?" Evelyn asked. Mina considered this with the thoroughness she applied to everything. "I don't know yet," she said, which was more honesty than most adults offered. By the 3rd day, Josiah had cut 5 feet into the hillside and begun to timber the entry. He had hauled the lumber from his old woodpile, good ponderosa pine, dry and straight, salvaged from a mine structure he had helped dismantle in 1879. He notched the uprights the way he had notched 1,000 before, fitted the cap piece tight, and felt the entry frame take the load of the earth above with a satisfying solidity that he could feel in his teeth when he tapped the wood. The scent in the tunnel was extraordinary. Cool clay, pine resin from the new timber, the faint sweetness of deep earth that had never been disturbed. Josiah breathed it in and felt, absurdly, 20 years younger. He worked from sunrise until 2 in the afternoon, then rested because his back told him to, and he had learned, at 67, to listen to his back. He ate the lunch Evelyn brought out without going inside: thick bread, cold beans, a cup of water from the spring, sitting on the fresh dirt pile with Oliver beside him, eating the same thing with great contentment. By the end of the first week, he had 12 feet of passage, 7 feet of width in the main chamber beginning to open beyond the tunnel, and the satisfaction of a man who was doing the right thing in exactly the right way. He had not told the children the full plan yet. He was waiting until there was something worth showing. The second week moved faster. Josiah was in his rhythm now, the old rhythm he had not felt in 6 years of retirement, the measured swing of the pick, the scrape and load of the shovel, the reading of each new face of earth as it appeared, the constant small decisions that mining required. This seam runs true. This patch needs more support. Here is where the ceiling rises naturally, and here is where it must be helped. He cut the sleeping alcoves on the 11th day, 2 of them set into the east wall of the main chamber, each one sized for a child, 4 feet deep, 3 feet wide, 30 inches high at the opening, the ceilings arching upward inside to give more room once you were lying down. He smoothed the floors of the alcoves with a flat board until they were level, then lined them with thin pine planks he had shaped on the sawbuck. He fitted the plank bunks inside with small lip boards at the edges so that a sleeping child would not roll out. He cut a lamp niche between the 2 alcoves, a small squared shelf reaching back 8 inches into the wall, deep enough to hold a lamp safely and keep the flame away from anything that might catch. He cut 3 cubby holes above each bunk, shallow shelf spaces where a child might keep a wooden horse, a stone they had liked the shape of, a book, a picture. He found, unexpectedly, that the clay a foot beyond the main chamber east wall was softer, moister, more workable, a pocket of finer-grained earth that the harder outer layer had protected. He had not planned what came next, but he recognized the opportunity the way a miner recognizes a seam that offers more than it owes. He cut a side passage. It went 4 feet to the right of the main chamber, rounded at the top, barely 3 feet wide, exactly the size of a child moving freely through a space that belonged to them. At the end, he opened it into a small, rounded nook, 5 feet across, just high enough for a child to sit upright without touching the ceiling. He smoothed its walls and its floor. He said nothing to anyone about it. Evelyn came to inspect on the 14th day. She walked the entry passage with a lantern held up, ducking slightly, and stopped in the main chamber and turned in a slow circle. She looked at the alcoves, the lamp niche, the cubbyholes. She looked at the squared ceiling, at the timber arches Josiah had fitted every 30 inches for support. She looked at the rough clay walls, still marked with tool lines, the floor not yet smoothed to finished evenness. She said nothing for a long moment. "It's a good room," she said finally. "Getting there," Josiah said. She touched one of the alcove openings with her fingertips, the way she touched things when she was deciding what they needed. "The walls want something." "Whitewash," Josiah said. "Next week." "And the floor." "I'll smooth and pack it, lay boards near the entrance for the wet season." She nodded slowly. Then she found the side passage, because Evelyn Baird did not miss things, and she bent and looked into it and then looked back at Josiah. "That wasn't in the plan," she said. "No." She looked at it for another moment. A small curved tunnel leading to a round quiet room at its end, smelling of clean earth, lit by nothing but the glow traveling in from the main chamber. "Oliver will never come out of there," she said. "That's all right," Josiah said. "There's a lamp niche in there too." Evelyn looked at her husband. He was dirty from his collar to his boots, gray-stubbled and tired about the eyes, and he was watching her with the careful expression he always used when he had done something he hoped she approved of, but could not predict she approved of it. She put her hand on his arm. "Come have your supper, Josiah. One more thing to square up. After supper." He came. On the 16th day, Josiah declared the structure sound. He had whitewashed the walls, 2 coats, cool and clean, the lamplight bouncing off them into every corner. He had packed and smoothed the floor. He had fitted a low wooden door at the entry, tongue-and-groove planks on an iron strap hinge with a simple wooden latch on the inside that a child could operate. He lit the lamp in the niche and stood back. The room was warm in the way underground rooms are warm, still, even, insulated by the earth on every side, smelling of pine and new whitewash and clean clay. He went to find Mina and Oliver. He did not have to look far. They were behind the cabin, Oliver building something complicated out of sticks in the grass, and Mina sitting on the old chopping block reading from the one book she had carried in her flour sack, a battered primer, its cover gone, its pages soft with handling. "I want to show you something," Josiah said. Oliver was immediately on his feet. Mina looked up, closed the primer, and followed with the deliberate pace of someone who has learned not to hurry toward things that might disappoint. He led them to the hillside entrance, where the little door waited. Oliver inhaled so sharply it was almost a squeak. Mina said nothing. She looked at the door, which was fitted neatly into the hillside's face, the slope's grass growing right up to its top edge, and her expression was the concentrated look she wore when something required full assessment. "Go on," Josiah said. Oliver did not need encouragement. He was through the door and into the passage before Josiah finished speaking, and they heard his voice come back to them from inside, slightly changed by the enclosed space. "It's a tunnel, Mina. It's a real tunnel. And nine. Mina put her hand on the doorframe. She felt the pine timber, the careful notching, the solidity of it. She ducked and went through. Josiah followed. He found Oliver in the main chamber, turning in circles in the lamplight with his arms out, which was how Oliver expressed maximum delight. And Mina was standing very still, looking at the 2 alcoves. She walked to the nearer one. She looked in at the plank bunk, the small lipboard at the edge, the 3 cubbyholes cut above it. She reached in and touched the whitewashed wall of the alcove's interior, and then she touched the plank floor with the flat of her hand, the way Josiah touched new ground when he was deciding if it was trustworthy. "This is mine," she said. It was not quite a question. "If you want it," Josiah said, "and the other one's Oliver's. Those shelves up there are for your things." She looked at the cubbyholes for a long moment, then she put her hand into the near one and held it there, inside the small, carved space, feeling the clay. "It won't fall in?" she asked. "No," Josiah said. He kept his voice level and unhurried. "The cap timbers carry the weight. The clay above is 8 feet of solid ground. It's braced every 30 inches. I built tunnels that stayed sound for 20 years of hard rock mining. This one will stand longer than the cabin." She looked at him then, a direct, evaluating look. "You know how?" she said. "I do," he said. "It's the one thing I am certain I know." Something shifted in her face, not a smile yet, not quite, but something that was considering becoming one. It was at this moment that Ed Granger came down from the neighboring property on the ridge above, following the sound of voices, and appeared around the corner of the cabin to find Josiah's excavated hillside and the small wooden door and the pile of cleared earth and the timber framing of the entry, and stood looking at it with the expression of a man viewing something he could not categorize. "Josiah," he said, "what in the Lord's name are you digging now?" Josiah stepped out of the entry to greet him. Granger studied the operation. He was not an unkind man, but he was a practical one, and practical men in the Colorado mountains of 1888 had opinions about old men digging into hillsides. "Those are your grandchildren's quarters?" Granger asked. "Will be," Josiah said. "Underground?" "Yes." Granger looked at the door, looked at the entry framing, looked at Josiah. He pushed his hat back and scratched his forehead. "Martha's going to have something to say about this." Martha Granger did have something to say. She came the following afternoon with a jar of preserved plum jam, as was her custom when visiting, and she stood in Evelyn's kitchen and said what she felt needed saying in the measured way of a woman who believes she is doing a kindness. "It isn't natural," she said. "Children sleeping underground, they'll be frightened. They'll feel buried. Mina's already had a hard enough time of it, Evelyn. She doesn't need anything making her feel more unsettled." Evelyn poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of Martha and sat down across the table. "Have you been inside?" Evelyn asked. "No." "Come see it tomorrow," Evelyn said. "I think you may find it different from what you're imagining." Martha was not the only one. The Hendersons from down the creek stopped on a Sunday to pass the time and were startled into visible concern by the hillside entry. Ben Henderson asked whether Josiah had shored the ceiling sufficiently, which was a reasonable question, and Josiah answered it in such patient, specific, technical detail that Ben nodded and said, "Well, you'd know better than most," which was the most anyone could fairly say. Mina heard none of these conversations directly, but she was an observant child, and she saw the expressions on the faces of visitors, and she was 8 years old, which is old enough to understand that adults sometimes decide things on behalf of children without consulting them. On the evening after the Hendersons' visit, she came to find Josiah at the woodpile where he was splitting the last of the day's kindling, and she stood beside him and waited until he set them all down. "People think it's strange," she said. "Some do," Josiah said. "Is it?" He thought about this honestly. "It's unusual," he said. "Underground rooms aren't usual for houses. They're usual for mines." He picked up a piece of kindling and turned it in his hands. "But mines are just rooms the earth happens to be around." She considered this. "Our room happens to have earth around it." "Exactly." She was quiet for a moment. A flicker moved through the pine trees at the top of the ridge, and the evening sound of the creek came up clearly from below, and the air held that particular late May smell of warmed pine and cold coming down from the higher elevations as the sun dropped. "I don't think it's strange," Mina said. She said it carefully, as if the admission cost something. "Good," Josiah said. "Oliver thinks it's the best thing in the world." "Oliver is right," Josiah said. She almost smiled. He's been sleeping with Captain in the little round room. The nook. He calls it the captain's quarters. Josiah picked up the maul. "Seems right." She started back toward the cabin, then stopped. "Grandpa," she said. It was the first time she had used the word directly, aimed at him, rather than obliquely in conversation with Oliver. He kept his face still so as not to make too much of it. "Yes," he said. "And the cubby holes," she said. "I put my book in the middle one. Good place for it. And the rock I found by the creek. The white one. Even better." "It looks nice," she said. "The shelf, with things in it." She went inside. Josiah stood at the woodpile for a moment, with the maul at his side, looking at the last stripe of light on the mountains, and he felt something in his chest that was not quite grief and not quite happiness, but lived in the country between them. The feeling of a thing that has been very wrong beginning, slowly, to come right. 3 nights after Mina had moved her book to the cubbyhole, rain came. Not a light rain, a full mountain storm, the kind that arrived without much warning in late May, driving in from the west and dropping 2 inches in 6 hours. The creek below the cabin rose audibly. Water sheeted off the hillside in dark rivulets, cutting around the entry door, running in thin threads down the slope. Josiah was up before dawn, lantern in hand, checking the entry. He found water at the door's threshold, not inside, but pressing close, probing. The drainage cut he had made angled correctly, but it was not wide enough. He had miscalculated by 3 inches. His stomach went cold. He sat on the porch in the rain with the lantern beside him and his hands on his knees. He was 67 years old. He had built this room with the full confidence of a man who had read ground for 4 decades, and he had missed something small, something correctable, but something real. The children's trust was in that room. Mina's book was in the middle cubbyhole. Oliver's wooden horse was sleeping in the captain's quarters, and he had missed 3 inches of drainage grade. He sat with this for a long time. In the mines, a missed calculation meant danger to men he was responsible for. He had never missed badly. He had been fortunate and also careful. Careful was the thing he could control. He had been careful here, but careful enough. The water at the threshold was an answer. It said, "Not quite." Evelyn appeared at the door behind him, a shawl around her shoulders. She looked at the rain, looked at him. "Is the room all right?" she asked. "Dry inside," he said. "But the drainage cut wants widening. I should have gone another 3 inches." She sat down beside him. "Then widen it tomorrow," she said. "I should have gotten it right the first time." "And now you'll get it right the second time," she said. "That's still getting it right." he breathed. She was correct, as she usually was. At first light, with the rain softened to a drizzle, he went out with his shovel. He widened the drainage cut by 4 inches instead of 3, making the correction and then adding a margin, because margins were what stood between probably fine and certainly fine, and his grandchildren deserved the latter. He repacked the cut with tamped clay, angled it cleanly, and redirected the overflow channel 6 feet further from the entry. Then he went inside, changed his wet clothes, and ate his breakfast. By mid-morning, the sun was back. June arrived the way June arrives in the Colorado mountains, slowly, then all at once, the hillside going from green to deep green, the creek dropping from storm quick to its steady summer voice, the air warming by degrees until the morning smelled of warming pine, and the evenings held a sweetness that drifted up from the meadow grass below the ridge. Evelyn had been making the room ready in the weeks since the storm. She had hung a short length of blue-checked canvas across the entry to each alcove, not heavy curtains, just a lightness of cloth that meant something, a threshold, a privacy, a small signal that these were rooms belonging to specific people and not merely spaces. She had put a pine cone on each shelf as decoration and then added a small piece of quilt fabric she had hemmed into a flat cushion for each bunk, tucking them in neatly against the whitewashed clay wall. She had lit the lamp niche twice an evening for a week, just to see how the light fell. It fell well. It moved along the arched ceilings of the alcoves in a way that Evelyn thought was beautiful and did not say so because she was practical, but she thought it. She brought down from the cedar chest a quilt she had made in 1871 when she had hoped briefly that Raymond's first wife would have a baby that winter. The baby had not come that year, and the quilt had been folded away and carried from house to house for 17 years. It was a double wedding ring pattern in blue and cream, and a yellow so faded it had become something gentler than yellow, almost gold. She laid it on Mina's bunk. Mina found it that evening and said nothing, but she touched every piece of the pattern with one finger, slowly tracing the rings. On the first Friday in June, Evelyn suggested that the children sleep in the underground room for the first time. Oliver had, in practice, been sleeping in the captain's quarters for a week already, coming inside for supper and the lamp-lit hour of stories, and then requesting, very politely, to go to bed, which had made Josiah and Evelyn share a look above his head. He had made a nest of his blanket in the rounded nook and installed Captain the horse on a small stone he had brought in from the creek, and the arrangement appeared to satisfy him completely. Mina was more deliberate about it. She brought her things down in 2 trips. Her book, her white stone, a small tin button she had found in the grass. She had not said where it came from, and they had not asked. A piece of ribbon Evelyn had given her. She arranged these in the 3 cubbyholes above her bunk with the care of someone who has not had shelves before and intends to use them correctly. She sat on her bunk. The lamp was lit. The blue-checked curtain was pushed to the side for now, letting the light of the main chamber fall across her bunk and her quilt and her cubbyholes. Above her, through 8 feet of packed clay and the hillside's solid earth, the evening bird song was barely audible. A soft, distant sweetness filtered through the ground, the way sounds come in from another room in a house where people are living. Josiah was sitting on the low stool he had put in the main chamber for this purpose, because it seemed right to be there for the first full night. Evelyn was knitting in the lamplight, her chair brought down the slope and through the entry with some negotiation about the door frame. "Is it cold?" Mina asked. "Cool," Josiah said, "and stays cool in summer. Stays warmer in winter than the cabin does." She pulled the gold and blue quilt up around herself. "It smells like the earth," she said. "It is the earth," Josiah said. She thought about this, like being inside a mountain. "Little bit." "You did this your whole life," she said. "I went inside mountains. 40 years, Josiah said. She looked at the arched ceiling above her bunk, at the smooth, whitewashed clay, at the timber cap piece he had fitted so carefully. She looked at the lamp in its niche, the small, steady flame, the way it filled the space with something that was not quite orange and not quite gold. "Were you ever scared?" She asked. He considered giving her the answer that was easiest. He decided against it. "Sometimes," he said, "when I'd hear something I didn't expect, or when a timber talked wrong. You learn to listen. You learn what's just the mountain settling and what needs attention. How do you know the difference? You pay attention long enough," he said, "and you don't go in without making things sound first." She looked at him steadily. "You made this sound." I did, he said. You can trust it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she lay down, pulling the quilt to her chin, and she looked at the ceiling above her, and something in her face, the careful, guarded, measuring look she had worn every day since the wagon, went slack. Not all the way, not completely, but enough. Enough to show the child underneath. Grandma, she said. Yes, sweetheart, Evelyn said, not looking up from her knitting. The curtain, Mina said. Evelyn reached over and drew the blue-checked canvas gently across the alcove opening, and behind it, Mina's lamp shadow stilled, and the sound of breathing from the captain's quarters had already slowed to the even depth of a sleeping boy, and Oliver's wooden horse stood guard on its creek stone in the dark. Josiah did not move for a while. He listened to the mountain. Its silence, its evenness, the way the earth held its breath steadily around this room he had made from nothing but need and knowledge and love. He looked at Evelyn. She was watching him over her knitting needles with the soft expression she had for moments that deserved remembering. He reached over and took her hand. Outside, the June evening moved across the Colorado hillside in its quiet way. The creek spoke below. The pines held their dark shapes against the last light. The cabin sat against the slope, and behind it, invisible from any road, a small wooden door was shut against the hill, and inside that hill, a lamp burned in a niche, and 2 children slept in the earth's keeping, safe, sheltered, young again. On a Saturday morning at the end of June, Josiah came around the back of the cabin to find both children sitting in the grass outside the underground door. Oliver was building a fence of sticks around a small stone he had appointed as captain's stable. Mina was reading, her back against the warm hillside, her feet in the grass. Neither of them looked up. They did not need to. This was their place now. The hill above them, the door behind them, the morning all around. Josiah stood for a moment, just watching. Then he got his tools. There was always something that could be made better. That was the gift of this life.